what appears to happen everywhere is identification. That's just part of the texture and play. So it's as real as anything else, because none of it's real. So you know what I mean? There's no real or not real. There's no, when it's said that there's no entity, there is an entity appearing. There is an identification appearing. That's as real as anything. None of it's real. It's all just energy. So there's no real right or wrong entity. There's no real entity or not real entity. It's just all dream happening this way. So it's as real as anything else. The identification is appearing. So
That's very, very true what you say. That's so spot on. And I think that many people in spirituality try or think it's the aim to be unidentified. That's the right way to be. That's the goal. But what you said there, that's in my view, so true. It just, the energy appears as an identification, and if you don't have to deny that, you just have to. It's liberating to see that it is just part of the play, as you would say it. Identification happens. Being fully identified can create more suffering, and seeing of you can't undo identifying because it happens, but you can be less cramped in it.
So he's identified as an entity, that person. And so that entity's not real, right? That's what we keep saying. That entity's not a real thing. But none of it's actually a real thing. So there is no contrast really. There's just appearances of contrast, and we're accepting them all as being just all the same value, if you like, the same validity. We're just seeing them as they are. Just there's one that has an appearance as a contracted entity that's a real contracted entity, and then there's one that's not a real contracted entity, but they're actually just the same energy.
Yeah. I get what you're saying. Yeah.
I mean, the same energy expressing differently. Such an interesting thing, the human mind. It seems like the intellect and the analytical thinking is a very powerful tool, but a very limited tool. And when that's allowed to broaden or open to this beingness, which is this fully interactive, connected openness, there seems to be if we put it into a story, there'd be the intellect and the analytical mind doing a powerful exercise in trying to deal with anxiety or health or whatever. And it gets to the limit of its capacity, and it doesn't know that there's all this. It doesn't know the broadness of this open, flowing intelligence of life. It doesn't know that, so it doesn't want to go there. And when it opens to all of that, which is what's happening with that, well, I don't know how it's going to work, but that leaning into it, that opening and leaning into the unknowable part of it, is what we've been talking about tonight, which is that opening to the unknown part, the openness, the infinite unknownness, which is what you are expressing in all these different ways. It's only unknowable in the human mind. It's completely intelligent energy, as I've always said. But that opening to that then allows that capacity of intellect to be played in that broader field, that open fullness. And in that, there can be a healing of these things, because it is like an opening, a trust. So that leaning in is completely unknown. That's leaning into unknown. And there was so much of that in this experience. Leaning into the unknown was when everything changed. It was leaning into the unknown. And that's totally not analytical. So that's the danger, insecurity, the opposite of the ego mind controlling and thinking it knows how to do things. It's like saying, okay, this is opening to complete unknowable, infinite openness that it already is. And then those tools of intellect can then play, but almost that word quantum feels more appropriate, where there's no linearness. There's no sort of, the stories play, but they're never important, and they can change at the drop of a hat. So it's just constantly, there won't be any start and finish. The story will all just be appearing. So the idea will all just be appearing, and it'll change all parts along the way and the end, always. That's what life seems to be doing now, because there's no real linearness to any of this. It is all just now, and it's all quantum, and it's all changing, and it's all, the word quantum means there's no start and finish, really. It's all just interacting and changing all the time. And that analytical mind tends to, just make a stream or polarization in part of it. But it'll be that unknowable background processing and everything else that we don't understand interacting.
Can I just say one thing about the surrender? Have you heard of a guy called Lester Levinson?
No, you always throw in some interesting names.
Lester Levinson was a guy who was a physicist, I think, very intellectual, and was basically had every malady in the book, and basically was told to go home and prepare his affairs, that he wasn't going to live very long, and he decided there was another way, and basically in 3 months just of constantly surrendering and letting go, he was able to be in the same place as John and recognize that, and open, basically. And he's on, you can listen to him in his, it's years ago, so I think in the 60s or even the 50s he was doing it. But he has a very interesting way of surrendering, and part of the surrendering is accepting that is not trying to change what you have, or but it's very difficult for me to explain, but it's worth just listening to him as another interesting way of surrendering, because for him, he was able to get to a place of complete openness and complete recognition of I guess, of non-duality. I don't think he sees himself as a non-dual teacher. He's now dead, but
no, it's just a concept. It's another word.
Sorry. Could you repeat his name?
Lester, Lester.
Mm-hmm.
Levinson, Levinson.
Okay. Yes.
And his the method that he uses was transcribed by different people who worked with him, and it's called the Sedona method, Sedona method, and a lot of people have used it. A lot of people have used it to relieve suffering, but I find it a very interesting premise. I don't understand how it works, but it certainly works in letting go a lot of the conditioning which defines who the beings are, who the electrical beings are, and it's a very useful way of letting go of a lot of the programming that you're completely unaware of, and it undoes it in layer upon layer upon layer upon layer. It's fascinating, absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, when you were talking about it, it sounded like that's that opening. But you said, I don't understand how it works. That sounds good.
There's an element of trust there for me anyway. I think, how can this possibly work? And then if I trust the process, and the undoing just happens, it's incredible.
Yeah, well, that's what I was sort of referring to with undermining the thinking mind or confusing the thinking mind. Actually, has the effect of making it let go because it's just too confused. It just can't work it out. So it just gets defeated, which is a good thing. For a while, that intellect can come back in and play later. That's a good thing. I was going to say something else there. It's just gone again. But it was about that whole thing as whatever's appearing, whatever's coming up, whatever's appearing, is what's sort of it is just what's blossoming. So it's never wrong. So if the human intellect and the identified separate self feeling contracts the energy to be directed in a certain way to investigate itself until it gets confused and breaks itself down, that whole movement of energy was brilliant, valid, lovely, and a useful tool, and then just dissolves and disappears again. So that's why all of this identification and I've said before, the separate self can be a tool. It's just still energy. It's just directed a certain way to pierce through some of the identification or some of the stories that's been created in the whole story. And that's wonderful. So that's where everything is accepted, because whatever's happening is perfect. And it couldn't have happened any other way because it's happening. Because it's just, yeah, so that's all of that just breaks down the understanding till it allows openness and realizes that this is just one interactive play. And then from that perspective, the intellect can come and play and dissect it further until it realizes it's doing that game again, and then that breaks down. It just, that's why everything that's happening, it doesn't have to change. The character traits don't have to change. They just need to be opened to as being another part of this expressing, and that's okay. And then in that, the suffering lets go and the contraction lets go, so it changes anyway. And most of the time, when I was doing that meditation that I was talking about, very simple, very, very rudimentary meditation, it was just like saying, you don't have to know how to do any of this. There's no right or wrong. You don't have to change anything. This isn't about fixing or doing anything well or badly. This is just about being here exactly as it is, and whatever's appearing is okay. Even if it doesn't feel okay, it's still okay. And being okay with whatever comes up, because you don't need to change it. The greater intelligence of this, which is you, will have a far more interactive change for its healing, or whatever we want to call it, anyway, without you having any idea of how it happened. You might then interpret it and relate it and play with it and use that as a tool to further deepen this opening. It's okay, whatever. That's why it's all just interactively okay. Nothing is not okay. The only thing that's not okay is the thinking, contracted mind that once again says, no, that's not how I want it to be.